No electricity, no batteries, no high-tech gadgets humming behind walls. Yet medieval homes braced themselves against the night with security systems that would leave even modern engineers nodding in admiration. Long before wires and Wi-Fi, communities wove protection into the very bones of their settlements. A woven net of stone, wood, bell strings, watchful dogs, and neighborly vigilance, so clever, it hums beneath our modern locks like a ghost from the past. Forget the image of armored knights clanking down castle corridors. The real story of medieval home security is far subtler and far stranger. Imagine waking in the pitch dark, the only light flickering from a half-spent candle on the hearth, a dog growling at a sound beyond the door, the same door secured by a wooden beam, or perhaps a puzzle lock so complex it would baffle a modern safe. The fear wasn't losing your phone, it was losing your life, or your crops, or waking to find the world outside your timber walls infected by plague. Survival was the game everyone played, whether you were a lord sipping wine behind stone ramparts, or a farmer asleep beside your cow because sharing warmth with livestock meant one more night alive. Some court records still exist, fragile parchment bearing the mundane terrors of daily life. An accusation of witchcraft because a neighbor's cow turned up inside out. A note on a peasant's death after falling off cathedral scaffolding. Death lurked in every crevice. Rats, plague, bandits, bad bread. If you were lucky enough to be born noble, your odds were better, protected by thick walls, iron locks, and private guards. In a world where the rich lived, on average, 2 decades longer than the poor, your wealth was your fortress. But even privilege offered no guarantees. One careless slip of poison in your goblet, one knife in the dark from a cousin with a claim to your land, and all that protection was gone in a heartbeat. While Hollywood loves to fill the screen with Viking hordes or nightly raids, the real threat was the ordinary and the unseen. Disease swept through cities like wildfire. Bad grain brought famine. And tavern brawls, petty arguments over ale or insult, killed more people than roadside bandits ever did. There's an old case from 1345. A man felled by a meat pie. Thrown in rage. The meat pie. One imagines the half-shocked, half-amused coroner scrawling that into the record. Yet despite all this chaos, people adapted. They built a latticework of defenses, some visible, many hidden in the everyday details of medieval life. At the heart of it all stood the walls. Take the city of York. Its ramparts rose stone by stone for nearly 2 centuries. Generations who laid foundations never saw the final gate swing shut. A family's wealth could depend entirely on how close they lived to the city center. Farthest from the looming threat at the wall's edge, if enemies breached the gates, the rich had time to pack, to flee, to vanish into the woods, while the poor near the gates fought or died. The walls were more than just battlements. They were living boundaries, with taxes to fund their endless repair, with guards who slammed the iron gates closed when plague threatened to seep in, who collected tolls for every sheep that passed beneath their archways. Try to imagine it. Dusk falling on a medieval town, the echo of the watchman's call drifting across rooftops as the gates thunder shut. If you were too slow, you spent the night outside. Fair game for wolves or thieves or worse. Inside, life arranged itself like a clockwork puzzle. Each family, each street, each trade guild played its part in the city's survival. The rich flaunted their iron locks' intricate mechanisms that could require 3 keys turned in perfect sequence. Symbols of status as much as security. One noble's chest from 1375 remains unopened to this day. The puzzle lock still mocking those who tried. Somewhere the original key lies buried under centuries of earth or dissolved into dust. Outside the walls, peasants didn't have such luxuries. Their defenses were crafted from necessity, using the scraps and bones of the world they knew. Dogs patrolled doorways, bells strung on threads clinked softly when stirred by a draft, ready to shriek if a hand pushed through a shutter. One archaeological dig in northern England found fragments of these makeshift alarms, broken pot shards, bent bits of church bell metal, scavenged and repurposed. Each piece a testament to a mind that refused to be preyed on. Community was the greatest shield of all. In a thatch-roofed village, where your entire world fit within a few muddy paths, nothing went unnoticed. A sneeze, a rumor, the squeal of a loose hinge, every sound carried. Court records from 1324 show that nearly 90% of burglary attempts failed, foiled by barking dogs or nosy neighbors with pitchforks and sharp eyes. You might think of social media as intrusive today, but in medieval life, your survival depended on that constant watchfulness. Some villagers turned to nature's sentinels, geese trained to honk at intruders. Others scattered dried peas inside hollow reeds, so a single careless footstep would rattle like bones under the moonlight. Each alarm was simple, crude, and astonishingly effective. Night was when fear pressed hardest. The darkness belonged to thieves, spirits, and superstition. So the villagers took turns on watch, trading a warm bed for a long cold vigil. Miss your turn, and you might owe the village to chickens a debt paid in feathers, not gold. For the truly desperate, there were locks of wood and rope, knotted puzzles that had to be untied in precise order, security measured in cleverness, not coins. And if that failed, well, sometimes the last line of defense was a sturdy chair jammed under the door handle. A poor man's barricade at the other end of the spectrum. Churches and monasteries guarded treasures with locks that required multiple key holders to stand together, a kind of medieval two-factor authentication, except your verification code was a silent monk with cold iron in his hand. For centuries, locksmith guilds hoarded their secrets, crafting puzzle locks that were less about keeping out intruders and more about demonstrating mastery. Each one was a riddle, a message encoded in metal. It all seems so distant now, these scraps of genius stitched into wood and iron, but the echoes of those locks, those bells, those faithful dogs still live in the mechanisms we trust today. Underneath the hum of security cameras and digital codes lie the bones of an old, defiant human need to protect what little we have, with whatever we can muster, even if all we have is string, bark, and the sharp eyes of a sleepless neighbor. No electricity, no batteries, no wires humming behind the walls. Yet for centuries, people guarded their fragile world with stubborn, ingenious resolve. When the wind rattled the shutters and a dog barked in the night, it was enough. A warning, a promise that someone was watching, that you weren't alone behind thin walls and a wooden latch. The deeper you peer into medieval society, the more you realize security wasn't just a matter of walls or weapons. It was ritual, rhythm, a carefully orchestrated balance of fear and cooperation, where survival depended not only on protecting yourself, but on protecting your place in the social order. And for those walking the streets after sunset, that order took human form. In the cloaked silhouettes of the night watch, they weren't soldiers, they weren't police. But in the hours when even the bravest locked their doors, the night watch moved through the city like quiet sentinels, guided by torchlight, bell chimes, and a sense of duty bought with loaves of bread and jugs of ale. In the official records, they appear as anonymous names scribbled beside numbers. 2 watchmen per ward. 4 in the richer districts. But behind those ledgers are the voices that once echoed down stone alleys. 10 o'clock, and all's well. Midnight draws near. Mind your fire and bolt your door. Their rounds were no idle stroll. They walked an average of 12 miles per night, across rain-slick cobblestones and frost-covered steps, alert for the whisper of fire, the rustle of a thief, or the groan of a drunk slumped in a doorway. Armed with wooden clubs, handheld lanterns, and the kind of resilience only hardship breeds, they were the nervous system of the city after dark, equal parts guardian, messenger, and walking warning sign. Some carried rattles, crude wooden instruments that could be shaken to raise an alarm. Others, bells that clanged like hammers in the stillness. And yet their power came not from force, but from visibility. The idea wasn't to surprise criminals, it was to remind them they were being watched. Still, for every rule, there were exceptions. One particularly infamous watchman in York became a legend not for his bravery, but for turning his nightly calls into rhyming couplets. Residents reportedly paid him to stop. Another in London delivered a baby, broke up a tavern brawl, and arrested a chicken thief all in a single night, earning a rare day off and a free pint for services rendered. Their nightly logs, now tucked away in faded archives, tell us more than royal chronicles ever could. They speak of real medieval life, not of kings and crowns, but of curfews missed, brawlers detained, fire outbreaks averted, and strangers turned away at the gates. They confirm a strange truth. Medieval security wasn't built on strength. It was built on awareness. Which brings us to the gates, literal and metaphorical. To control who could enter or escape, a city after hours was a power so absolute. It shaped not just crime but commerce, plague control, and social mobility itself. If you didn't return by sundown, the gates would close, miss the toll, and you slept outside the city, exposed. This wasn't just inconvenience. During the Black Death, cities shut their gates entirely, desperate to keep the sickness out. Those who didn't make it inside in time were simply left to fate, and behind those gates, a world regulated by codes most citizens never saw, rules passed down by guilds, councils, and monarchs who believed order could be bought, carved, or enforced. Enter the locksmiths. Hidden behind heavy shutters and soot-streaked workshops, these artisans were more than blacksmiths, they were engineers of secrecy. A master locksmith's work was part puzzle, part prophecy. To be accepted into a guild meant crafting a masterpiece, a lock so ingenious that it could resist all but its own creator. Many survive today in museums, their internal mechanisms still baffling engineers after 6 centuries. One discovery in York unearthed a 14th century merchant's house. Inside, a 3-tiered locking mechanism lay embedded in the wooden door. 3 keys, 3 sequences. No witnesses to how it worked, only speculation and reverence for the mind that built it. Yet not all could afford such marvels. For most peasants, locks were made of wood and rope. Sliding bars, knotted sequences, even doors weighted with furniture. One case from 1342 tells of a farmer who devised a series of cords that had to be untied in the correct order, a sort of early combination lock. It worked flawlessly until winter, when the ropes froze, and the man spent hours trying to re-enter his own home. But perhaps the most creative solutions were reactive. One peasant woman reportedly stacked every item of furniture against the door, at night, including her mother-in-law's prized chair. Another trained geese to honk at strangers. Still another filled dried reeds with peas so they'd rattle when stepped on. These were not the inventions of passive victims. These were innovations born from urgency, sharpened by fear. Even the churches got involved. Monasteries often held the community's only valuables, relics, scrolls, coins. To protect them, they used multi-key locks that required 3 monks to open simultaneously. It was trust distributed, a primitive version of modern-day secure logins. Except instead of a phone prompt, you needed 3 celibate men with identical keys and overlapping schedules. Ownership of a key meant something. A merchant's apprentice caught copying a master's key without permission could lose his hand. In London, it wasn't uncommon for only the mayor and designated guards to possess keys to the city gates. Holding one was akin to holding fate. You controlled who passed through the boundary between safety and chaos, but not every crime could be prevented by locked doors and barking dogs. And when crimes did occur, the medieval mind turned to its next tool, punishment, not just to restore order, but to send a message. The justice system was direct, brutal, and occasionally poetic. A first-time offender might face time in the stocks, humiliated in public squares while villagers hurled rotten produce. It wasn't the pain that did the damage, it was the shame. Shame, in medieval society, was currency. Repeat offenses meant physical punishment, branding, mutilation. One man caught stealing bread might find his ears nailed to a post. They'd free him after a day. If he came back, there wouldn't be a third chance. The law didn't believe in reform, it believed in deterrence. Yet, in rare moments, mercy peeked through the iron. There's the famous case of the bread thief in 1364. The man stole a loaf. The judge didn't jail him. Instead, he was sentenced to work in the baker's shop for a season. He later became a permanent employee. Some crimes weren't punished with vengeance, but with opportunity. A dangerous idea, even now. Punishments were tailored. Steal wine. You might spend a week announcing town news until your throat gave out. Take a butcher's tools. Welcome to a month of cleaning blood off stone floors. One creative magistrate made a man who'd stolen chickens feed every bird in the village for a month. You could almost hear the feathers rustling in smug satisfaction. Still, justice was swift and public. Trials were rarely private. Courtrooms became theaters. Towns gathered to witness outcomes. One Canterbury man tried to steal a door, just the door. When caught, he claimed it had blown into his yard during a storm and he was protecting it. The court disagreed. Another thief tried to make off with a beehive. That one didn't end well. Angry bees aren't subtle. Theft, more often than not, was practical. Bread, cheese, tools, not jewels, not gold. Most medieval thieves weren't looking for treasure. They were hungry, cold, or desperate. In 1375, one town's court records show 60% of thefts involved food or clothing. Only 10% were luxury items. The other 30%, tools, axes, hammers, items that could be used to build trade, or steal again. Conviction rates were high to 70% or more. Why? Because anonymity was a luxury few could afford. Everyone knew everyone. What you wore, what you owned, even what you ate. Try stealing someone's cloak and wearing it to the next feast. You'd be recognized before the soup arrived. And yet, justice cut both ways. Nobles caught stealing, often paid dearly, triple damages. Public humiliation. In one case, a lord was forced to sponsor a year's worth of town festivals after being caught embezzling grain. Locals made sure that year's events were especially extravagant. Justice was, in many ways, the final thread in the medieval tapestry of security. It didn't merely punish, it reinforced the rules, the invisible web that held cities together. When bells rang and boots echoed against stone, when the watch called the hour and gates slammed shut, it wasn't just noise, it was structure, memory, warning. A society without surveillance cameras, without algorithms, without motion sensors, and yet, somehow, it worked. Because they understood something we sometimes forget. Security isn't just about fear, it's about connection and consequence. The walls may have fallen, the keys may have rusted, but the echoes remain, waiting to be heard. Asterisk. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind rattles the windows of an old English farmhouse or whistles through the stones of a forgotten wall, you can almost hear it, the echo of a dog's bark, the jangle of a bell, the soft tread of watchmen pacing beneath a distant torch. These sounds belong to a time when safety was never guaranteed, when fear and faith bound people together in a compact stronger than any iron-locked dot in the medieval mind. Protection was more than a physical act, it was spiritual insurance. People pinned herbs above doorways to ward off evil spirits. They carved protective symbols into beams and thresholds, hoping to confuse demons or witches who might slip through the cracks when no one was watching. In rural villages, some families buried iron knives beneath doorsteps, a secret blade against misfortune. These rituals feel quaint now, the stuff of folklore, but to them, they were as real as the stone walls and barking dogs. Communities leaned heavily on these beliefs when reality offered little comfort. No matter how thick the city gates or how sharp the watchman's club, plague cared nothing for boundaries. Rats scurried through the same walls that capped out bandits. Contagion spread faster than any alarm bell could ring. In desperate times, a city's greatest defense was isolation. Quarantine, gates bolted. Strangers turned away. Family members buried in silence. But even plague had its paradoxes. It forced communities to innovate. London, hammered by outbreak after outbreak, introduced some of Europe's first systematic records of deaths, the bills of mortality, that read like grim ledgers of human fragility. Cities built pest houses on their outskirts, crude quarantine wards that mirrored today's biocontainment zones. Travelers were inspected. Traders required special permits to cross the gates. The watchmen, who once caught petty thieves, now policed. The invisible killer, one lantern and one toll at a time. As the centuries crept forward, these layers of protection began to intertwine with the rise of new trades and secrets, the kind you won't find in any official royal decree. Among the guilds that flourished in the late Middle Ages, locksmiths and masons held knowledge that was equal parts practical and arcane. They crafted vaults and cathedrals, coded messages into stonework and iron, symbols visible only to those taught to read them. Some historians argue these early builders weren't just tradesmen, they were keepers of hidden blueprints for how to protect entire communities from more than just thieves. From chaos itself, you can see hints of this encoded wisdom in the marks left on cathedral stones, symbols etched by stonemasons to identify their work, but also to mark secret lines of strength within the walls. In York Minster, some stones bear notches that align with solstices and equinoxes as if time itself was woven into the structure's bones. Did they believe a cathedral could stand as a fortress against the world's decay? Perhaps, or perhaps it was simply another layer of human ingenuity, pushing back the darkness with whatever tools they had. Then there were the manuscript keepers, monks and scribes who copied forbidden texts under flickering candlelight. Not every parchment in a monastery library was a Bible or a sermon. Hidden among prayers were works on herbal poisons, locks and traps, strategies for siege and counter-siege, manuals for survival, disguised as harmless theology. In these vaults of knowledge lay secrets of how to defend a home, a village, a mind, knowledge that, if found by the wrong hands, could tip the balance of power in a heartbeat. It's tempting to imagine that medieval life was simple, that it was all hardship and superstition, with none of the cunning that defines modern security. But listen closely to what survives. The court rolls, the battered chests with puzzle locks still sealed shut, the bell wires unearthed from peasant huts. They tell a different story. They show a people who understood that survival was never passive. You did not wait for a king to protect you. You built your defenses one string, one stone, one rumor at a time. Even today, we echo their methods more than we admit. When you bolt your door at night, when you set an alarm, when a neighborhood watch sign greets you at the end of a cul-de-sac, these are the ghosts of that medieval web, a human chain of trust and vigilance, binding us together when the world outside turns hostile. Yet for all the locks and walls, it was community that saved most lives. The villagers who checked on each other at dusk, the watchmen who braved the bitter wind, half drunk on cheap ale but unwavering in their rounds, the neighbor who heard a dog bark and took up a pitchfork. Together, they formed the real barrier against the wolf scratching at the door. In some corners of Europe, fragments of these medieval defenses linger. A city gate here, still swung shut each night for tradition's sake. A bell tower that once warned of approaching armies, now ringing out for Sunday services. Even the ancient rite of sanctuary, a desperate criminal flinging himself into a church and claiming the protection of holy ground, has echoes in our modern laws, our embassies, our safe houses, shadows of old codes rewritten for a new age. And while our digital fortresses hum with cameras and keyboards, something essential remains the same. Security is never perfect. Locks can be broken, walls can fall. The real shield, then and now, is what we're willing to do for one another when fear comes knocking. So the next time you pass a city wall, pause and run your hand along the stones. Beneath the moss and mortar lie centuries of whispered warnings, ingenious traps, and watchful eyes. Each mark carved by hands that understood, perhaps better than we do, that safety is not the absence of danger, it is the promise that someone stands ready when darkness returns. And if you listen closely, in that hush just before dawn, you might still hear it, the faint echo of a watchman's call drifting across the centuries. 10 o'clock and all's well, and for now, so are you. Asterisk.